Oh, hello. My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Woe. So guys, this is the second to last novel we're going to talk about, and in terms of actual writing, this is the last Poirot novel ever written. So we are talking this week about Elephants Can Remember, and this is a part of Project Poirot. So if you have never seen a Project Poirot video before, welcome. I'm rereading all of the Poirot novels and most of the short stories in roughly order of publication, chronological order-ish. We are almost at the end, but just so you know, this is not a spoilery review, so I will take you in a synopsis up roundabouts to where we find a body. In this case, because it is a murder that took place in the past, I'll just sort of do the setup. And I will get into some character details, but nothing I don't think that should ruin the book for you. That my kind of mindset is that these should be something that encourages people to read the book, not something that would spoil it for them. So with all that being said, let's get into a quick little synopsis of Elephants Can Remember, and then we will do some analysis and my thoughts. So Elephants Can Remember takes place in 1972 in the springtime, based on just some of the details included. And we open with Mrs. Ariadne Oliver, who is just a champ and a real MVP at this point in the Poirot books, because she is still a goddamn delight. I am thankful and happy to report to you. She's going to a literary luncheon. It's kind of a drag. She's not that into it, but she, is a famous mystery novelist and has been invited to it. So she goes, and she runs into a lady who is a politician of sorts, named Mrs. Burton Cox. And she kind of sidles up to Mrs. Oliver in a, gross way, basically, like a really ass-kissy kind of way, and is like, hey, so, I heard that you are the godmother of Celia Ravenscroft, and Mrs. Oliver legit doesn't even remember this at first, so, apparently she has so many godchildren she doesn't even know who they all are. But anyway, we'll get into things like that later. Anyway, so she's like, oh, yeah, I kind of remember her. And basically Mrs. Burton Cox then says, so did her father kill her mother, or did her mother kill her father? Dun dun dun! And she's basically, Celia is dating her son Desmond. There's a lot of Desmonds in these later books, and I mean, no offense if your name is Desmond, but it's just, at least in America, it's not a very common or very sexy name. Anyway, her son, who's her adopted son, is basically engaged to this girl, and she's kind of saying, based on the heredity, she feels like it matters whether or not her mother killed her father killed her mother. Mrs. Oliver kind of remembers, or Mrs. Burton brings up, that basically they were found, her parents, Celia's parents, were found dead on the cliff at their manor home, both dead of a gunshot wound, and it was unclear if it was double murder, if it was a murder-suicide, what the deal was. And Mrs. Burton Cox is basically like, you need to get to the bottom of this and let me know, because I want to know who's marrying into my family. And Mrs. Oliver basically tells her to fuck off, politely, but that's the substance of it. But it does pique her interest, and so she looks up this goddaughter who she hasn't seen in years and years and years, and we'll also get into the timeline because it makes no sense. But anyway, she invites her over and basically says hey, just so you know, your future mother-in-law did this, and out of curiosity, I'm not going to tell her, but do you know? And Celia basically says, well, no, I was, abroad in Switzerland. I was at boarding school, so I have no idea what actually happened. But it's funny you mention it, because this has been really weighing on my mind, and I want to kind of find out what happened before I do get married, just because it's, I don't want it to ever bother Desmond. Very, very similar, by the way, to the kind of conversation that happens in Five Little Pigs, but we'll get there. So anyway, because of all of this, basically Mrs. Oliver's just intrigued, and so she gets Poirot involved, our intrepid detective, Poirot, and they both kind of take two different angles at investigating this. Poirot is talking to sort of the police who've been involved. Good old Superintendent Spence shows back up in this one, as well as some other police. He kind of takes that line of things, and then Mrs. Oliver is interrogating all of her elephants, hence the title, women like basically old biddies who have really good memories is kind of who she's talking to. So between them, they arrive at the truth, and we find out exactly what happened in that murder all those years ago. A couple of other notable characters you probably need to know about include some of the people in the house at the time. So Lord and Lady Ravenscroft, you know, they're the two who end up dead. But the other people involved in the house there's some servants. So there's Zelly and Maddie were there. They're like these French housemaid governess people. And then Dorothea, who was Lady Ravenscroft's sister, was also living with them at the time, though she did sleepwalk and die a month previous, so she wasn't actually alive at the time of the death. But she was in the house. Celia has an older brother, but he was not in the house at the time. He was also away at boarding school, and then just like a lot of friends and like acquaintances that they had between the two of them, the couple, also kind of come up into the picture. I think that's most of what you need to know for us to get into a little bit of discussion, so let's do that. So I think probably the most notable thing that we need to talk about with this last written Poirot novel is that it's just really clear that Agatha Christie was in a real mental decline at this stage. As has been my critique with, I think, the last like 4 or 5 ones that we've talked about, this book has a very promising start and a not very satisfying resolution or execution. I think, honestly, that's just because she was, I believe, 82 at this point and was just not able to write as well as she used to be able to. There's been some really interesting analysis, and if I can find the link, I'll put it below. There was an episode of Radio Lab about this, but there's been some really interesting analysis about how she actually, you can see in the text itself in terms of her use of vocabulary and her use of repetition that it's sort of indicative of mental decline. Her vocabulary was much more limited than it had been in previous books, and she uses words in different ways than she used to. And yeah, I just think that this book, it doesn't feel as sparkly and as fun as her books usually do, and I think it's just honestly because she was not able to write as well as she used to be able to. The premise, like I said, is actually really interesting, I think. She's done this particular premise a few times, like I said, most notably in Five Little Pigs, where there is a murder in the past that we are now trying to resolve for somebody in the present. And I do think in general she does these plots pretty well, and I don't even know that this one is particularly not good in terms of like the pieces of it. I think actually come together better than some of the other ones she's done recently. Like, I'm hard-pressed to decide if I think this is worse, for instance, than Halloween Party, because I actually may have enjoyed this one a little bit more. I'm not sure. We'll talk about that at the end. But it's just that there's just some real, like, plot holes in this. So, like, especially with regard to timeline. Oh my god. Okay, so Ariadne Oliver, who must, at this point, just based on, like, she was already in her late middle age in 1936 when we first meet her. This is now 36 years later, and she is described as being the school friend of a woman who had a 25-year-old daughter. How? That is not possible. Like, that does not make any sense. She, I think at some point references only knowing Poirot for like 10 or 20 years. She's clearly known him for at least 36 years, probably closer to like 40. There's just some real holes in terms of how things are timed. Like, there's dates that are given that don't make sense with dates that are given later. Like, she just clearly is not as into the details. And the thing about, and you know, maybe in a different type of book that would be okay, but in an Agatha Christie novel, it's all in the details. So it does undercut, like, I found it very noticeable, and maybe because I was reading closely, or maybe because I'm just trained in an Agatha Christie novel to pay really close attention to the details, because that's how you figure shit out. But the details on the timeline do not make sense, and that kind of undermined my confidence in the story as a whole, if that makes sense, just because, like, it usually is such a big part of her writing. It's also, like, it's written by an elderly woman, and it is populated by elderly women, and there's a real sense of, like, age and sort of, like, decrepitude to this book in a lot of ways. That feels really weird to say, but again, I keep bringing up Five Little Pigs because it is, to my mind, the apt comparison to be making here. Sorry, you can see I took little notes on a little post-it here. But Five Little Pigs is such a good book. Like, it's a really, really good Christie. It's a lot of people, like, on that video, a couple people commented saying this is my favorite Christie. So it's definitely a really solid entry in the Christie canon. And this book just doesn't hold up to it in any way, shape, or form. And that's a book where the details are important and they do add up, and they're really, really good. Oh yeah, that's where I was going with this. Okay, so about this feeling really old. So Five Little Pigs is like virtually the same book in a lot of ways, like different details, but like what is trying to like the framing device, and like this is a murder in the past and we need to resolve it because these like plucky young kids gotta get together and get married. Like, that felt very like alive, like very lively and very engaging and just full of life. And this book like is about these two young things getting together and like living happily ever after, but it just feels so like she feels so disconnected from what it might be like to be that age at this point. Like, I don't think that the young characters in this book come across very fully fleshed out or fully rounded. I do think that the older characters, though, and again, this gets into this feeling kind of old and decrepit in a lot of ways, those characters are, I think, more carefully drawn. And I think that there's a lot of discussion about like what it means to get older, like what living situations older people find themselves in, and like what kind of choices you do and don't have once you hit a certain age. So, in that respect, I think it's an interesting, almost like commentary on age, or like it could be seen as like a reflection on age. But I just think that she is unable to really like make the most of that at this point in her career. And it's a lot of people talking, and I don't think that there was a time in her career, like Murder on the Orient Express and Five Little Pigs are both great examples of this, where they're very talky books. It's a lot of like Poirot investigating people and like interrogating them, trying to figure out what they do and don't know, and like what they do and don't remember. This is also a very talky book in a lot of ways, and it feels talky, like it's not handled as elegantly as it was in previous books. And I think this book has a lot of references to other books in it, so if you are somebody who's been reading along with the series, it does reward that, because there's a lot of kind of intertextual references, like there's, some references to Halloween Party, which was the last one, like just there's a lot. But I also think that it takes the tricks from a lot of different books, so like Five Little Pigs, let me just say that again. That one, definitely some similarities I could see there. There's a couple of similarities in terms of mechanics from Dead Man's Folly in some places. There's some mechanics from Mrs. McGinney's Dead that come in, and I don't want to get too specific because I'm not going to spoil this, but just elements that I'm like, oh, I've seen you do that trick before, you know what I mean? So, and I think she's just not... Again, her writing capability makes it not feel as smooth or as surprising as I might want it to. And actually the way she introduces the certain details that tell you who did it, like I spotted pretty much immediately. Some of that is because I've read a lot of Christie, so I know her tricks, but I was like, oh, this must be what happened. So, yeah, just not a very elegant mystery in some ways in that respect. And then the only other thing I wanted to bring up is that there seems to be a recurring theme in her recent books about violent death of children. That comes up as a part of a couple of characters' backstories, and like I don't want to get into it too much, but like there's been a lot of that in the last few books. I mean, definitely in Halloween Party, but like, yeah, there seems to be a lot of comfort with children dying quite violently, and that is a little bit uncomfortable. I guess the first time we saw that was in Dead Man's Folly, but anyway, that just as a side note, I'm like, Agatha, like, what do you got against the kids? Yeah, but all in all, this was the last Poirot novel she ever wrote. In terms of ordering, Curtain, the one that we have left, is the very last Poirot novel, but she wrote that one in the 40s. This is the last one she actually wrote in her lifetime, and like I've been saying, you can kind of feel it. There is also, next week we're going to be talking about a collection of short stories, so we still have two more fictional works from her to get through, but yeah, this kind of, I don't know. I'll be interested to see after I've read Curtain if that feels like a finale. In terms of like her writing style, her themes, and all of that, this kind of feels like a finale to me. And I almost wish maybe this was. We'll see what I think after I've read Curtain. But I think, yeah, you can feel that this is the last of something. All that being said, in terms of where I would place this, I struggle because I think I don't know. The writing in this one was so much worse than Halloween Party, but I think that the overall coming togetherness of the plot works a lot better than this one, than Halloween Party. I think just because it is so clear how much her mind has gone at this point and how much the details don't come together, I will go ahead and put this beneath Halloween Party, but I think they're pretty right there together. And I probably actually enjoyed this one a little bit more, maybe. But I think, yeah, it has some real writing issues. So there you go. So yeah, that's another entry in good old Project Poirot. Like I said, we're getting up towards the end, guys. Like we only have a couple of things fiction-wise left to read. We've got the Harlequin tea set, so that I'm going to read not next week, but the week after. Next week, we're going to talk about my personal favorite Agatha Christie adaptations. Oh, and I should mention that there was an announcement of a new adaptation for the ABC Murders starring John Malkovich. I think that will be on the BBC and then on Amazon for those of us in the US. So I'm really excited about that. It's not a favorite book of mine, but I think it's one that really lends itself to film quite nicely. Like, I think maybe even it might work better in visual form than it does in written. So I'm actually really excited to see what they do with that. I'm excited to see when that comes out. So just FYI, that is a new adaptation coming out. But anyway, I will be talking next week about all of my personal favorite adaptations that have taken place to date. Oh, and I just realized in that one I don't mention another good BBC adaptation, which was the And Then There Were None adaptation that came out a couple years ago. So, preview, bonus recommendation for that one. I enjoyed that particular adaptation of that book. So anyway, side note, we'll talk more about that next week. And then the week after we'll do Harlequin tea set. And then I think there's a video about some of my books about Agatha Christie, and then on the 14th we'll be reading Curtain. So it'll be like a month until we get to the final novel, because I honestly just wanted to linger and savor and didn't want things to be over yet. So it'll be a while till we get to the very end of the books, but it is coming. So, get your tissues and get ready for the end, because it's coming. But with all that said, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you're having a really, really wonderful day, and I will talk to you soon. Bye!